Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Blockchain and Bitcoin, the Transformation of Supply Chain Finance. I'm your host, Helen King. Supply chain finance is going next generation with this new model. In this webinar, we'll explain what blockchain and Bitcoin are and how companies are using it, why it's more secure, and how you can use them to finance materials in your supply chain. Before I hand this over to Laura and our panel, there are a few things I want to cover with you. We're recording today's session, and we will post it to our on-demand webinars page. You can visit our website to listen to this or any of our other webinars. Additionally, we'll send out the slides to all attendees within 24 hours of this recording. We encourage you to share the slides and the recording with others in your organization. And if you have questions, please reach out to Laura or myself to set up a discussion. We want to hear your questions about our findings. Please post to the chat or the Q&A function to the left of your screen. We set time at the end of the webinar to address your questions. Finally, we will be live tweeting the webinar, so if you'd like to join the social media conversation, you can use the hashtag SCIWebinar, as well as follow us on Twitter at SCInsightsLLC during the event. Now let me introduce our host, Laura Ciceri, founder of Supply Chain Insights. As an enterprise strategist, Laura focuses on the changing face of enterprise technologies. Her research is designed for the early adopter seeking first mover advantage. She comes to the stage with over 40 years of experience in supply chain. Welcome, Laura.
Well, thank you so much, Helen, and thanks for the group that's joined us today. We had about 750 people sign up for this webinar, so it's definitely a popular topic. And I've been working with Sweeney and Brian on blockchain concepts in the Network of Networks work, and I asked each of them to join me today to talk about the work that they're doing, just because this is new and I wanted them to share. So, Sweeney, can you tell the group a little bit about yourself? And then Brian, I'll do the same.
Sure, Laura. First of all, thank you very much for having us on this panel, and glad to be in front of this audience. So folks, my name is Sweeney Ponoth. I'm the general manager for Bristlecone Labs, a supply chain advisory firm based out of San Jose. We've been working with Laura on Network of Networks and specifically blockchain, which I am actually dabbling with as a part of the parent company of Bristlecone, Mahindra, in the automotive sector. Back to you, Laura.
Okay, and Brian, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So good afternoon, folks, and Laura, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Brian Tessier. I'm the Vice President of Global Supply Chain Information, and I'm part of our Global Supply Chain Transformation organization here at Schneider Electric. My participation in blockchain as well as my interactions with Laura have both been as one of the member companies that's participating as part of the consortium to test and develop the Network of Networks. And in my day job at Schneider Electric, I also help to run the Center of Digital Innovation, which is our incubator internally where we test out new technologies and then industrialize it so that we can deploy it to our supply chain around the world.
Awesome. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go through some definitions, and then Brian and Sweeney, I'm going to ask you to share some of your experiences. So basically, what is blockchain? You know, it started in 2009. It's an immutable digital ledger of economic transactions that can be programmed to record just not financial data, but virtually anything of value. And while blockchain is secure, the software on blockchain may not be, and it's evolving. And there are many variants of blockchain that are evolving. I have a lot of system integrators and venture capitalists who call me to talk about blockchain use cases. And many times we're going down into narrow routes on blockchain, but hyperledger is IBM's branding, and that's the form of blockchain that we're using in the Network of Networks. A software term Fabric sits on top of hyperledger to enable the passing of contracts and supply chain documents. Now, I wrote in a recent report about the digital supply chain that there are a number of use cases for blockchain. One of the things that we're testing in the Network of Networks is a community registry. Could we write our information once and have it go across multiple networks? And that's currently the work that we're focused on. Ultimately, what we'd like to do is find a replacement for EDI, and that's something we'll be testing, as well as lineage, or the ability to track and trace, or safe and secure supply chains so that we know where goods come from and we can track chain of custody for things that require special handling. Also, improving social responsibility goals with an immutable ledger of vendors that meet certain social responsibility objectives. The redefinition of supply chain finance, one of the things that excites me is, do we have the ability to disintermediate banks or to disintermediate credit cards, and then just fundamental document sharing. Sweeney, when you look at these use cases, what excites you?
So Laura, I have a bias, right, because of the company that I work for. Clearly, supply chain is one of the biases. The second one is our parent company, Bristol-Cohen's parent company, is Mahindra, which is one of the largest tractor manufacturers in the world. So for us, blockchain is actually creating an opportunity to kind of disintermediate or disrupt the automotive sector, right? So we see use cases like track and trace in the auto sector, where the moment there is a part failure, right, be it an axle or something, immediately a recall notice is sent out to the end consumer, right? So you don't have to wait for notices to come out on the web or through some federal regulations. So just reducing that liability because of that speed is important. The second one is provenance, where you talk about where a particular product or the raw materials are coming from becomes important. Right, and clearly the last one is around financial settlement. How do you reduce the cost to serve in this complex supply chain? So bringing all those components together is what is exciting to me, especially in the automotive sector.
Awesome. And Brian, how about for you in the electronics sector? What do you think are the most exciting use cases, or do you have some that you would add?
So I think that the ones that Sweeney brought up are very important and also very exciting to us. But at least from our perspective, we're looking at this as a platform to help us bridge the complexity that we have natively within our business. We're 182 years old, and we've grown massively through acquisition. And as a result of those acquisitions, we have a lot of IT complexity. So we're looking at blockchain for several reasons, but a big one for me is the ability to have a platform agnostic layer that I can use to transact not only with my customers and my vendors, but also amongst the Schneider family of businesses in a way that has less friction and has that lineage capability as far as the ongoing ledger. You can always go back and see what transpired throughout the life cycle of a given transaction if you use this as the mechanism for communication. So I think that the best is yet to come as far as applications. I think all of your use cases are very key as far as areas for us to disrupt in. But I think there are some very old business models that are ripe for the picking. Things like the transfer of ownership between corporations when we talk about real estate, or looking back in time to see who's owned property for an extended period of time. The basic fundamental concepts of asset ownership and how that's certified are really on the table for disruption with this technology.
So, Brian, I think that we're on the cusp of a lot of business process disruption, whether it's insurance or ownership or EDI. And, what excites me is just the possibilities. They're just numerous. How long have you been testing with blockchain? Because you were one of the first people who really, pushed out to me to say, this is exciting. How long have you been testing it?
So I started fooling around with blockchain probably in late 2015. The majority of the structured development activities have taken place in 2016. And since we started right now, I've got 3 real concrete use cases that we've done some hands-on testing where we can show fruit as a result of this. And I think the thing that I want to really point out is this is just barely starting to make it to mainstream media. You're starting to see it on CNN during commercials. You're starting to hear about it via newspapers and blogs. This is not a research technology anymore. This is something that businesses are experimenting with. and we're finding very real places for us to use it within the business to decrease the cost to serve and remove friction in our processes. So it's here today, and we've been using it for quite some time.
So, Brian, why did it take from 2009, the inception, to 2015 for, you're an early adopter, for you to start to try it? Was it the bringing it to bear in commercial software, or tell me a little bit about that evolution?
Well, the thing is first and foremost, I think that anything that challenges the general paradigms of business transactions the way that this does tends to create either an allergic or an autoimmune response from businesses. If you think about how on its head this can flip some of our standard operational paradigms, that can be a very uncomfortable thing for business. But from a technology standpoint, the things that I've struggled with up until maybe about the last year or so is this was a generalized theorem that was published by somebody under a pseudonym, and it really only started to be industrialized in a fewer number of products, to the point where you could actually compare from platform to platform the strengths and weaknesses of the individual implementations of blockchain technology. Before last year, there were dozens and dozens of different implementations, and now we're starting to see through market pressure and adoption, certain ones are starting to pull ahead. And the other thing that kind of slowed down the experimentation with the solution was this has only really started to become available as something that you could experiment with in your standard rapid application and software development environment over the last few years. So the tools have gotten a lot better and are much more accessible today than they were, maybe 5-6 years ago.
Got it. And Brian, we have a question. Ed wants to know which 3 concrete use cases you've been working on. I know you've been working on Lineage, and you've been helping us with the community registry and the network of networks.
Yep.
Can you explain your other use cases?
Sure. So first and foremost, the genealogy and traceability problem is something that I think we all are facing. That's something that we're working on specifically to create a cryptographic double of our products and services in blockchain, so that we can, instead of when we produce something, having to do the archaeology of pulling the data forward to a serial number, creating the blockchain representation of the product earlier on in the order conversion process. So we've got a container that we can start to attach all these different things that happen to the product through manufacturing and along the supply chain. So genealogy and traceability is one. Another one that I struggled a little bit with, but we were successful, at least from a test standpoint, was an IoT application for real-time location tracking and sensor telematics. And learned through that particular pilot a bunch of things, which I'll talk about when we get some more time to go into the specifics of the pilot. And then last but not least is the network of networks. So, if you think about the promises that some of the software industry has made to us over the last, 10, 15 years, integration was seen to be something that was just on the edge of the horizon for us. And, we are more disconnected when you look at interfaces between systems than we've ever been before. Things exist in silos. So what we're looking to do is to really start to merge those things through the network of networks application. We picked a use case specifically, which is digital supplier onboarding. And I think Laura will talk a little bit more about that. But those are really the 3 focus areas that we've gone after in the Cody Lab.
Awesome. Now let's shift gears and talk a little bit about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an alternate form of currency, and it's used for peer-to-peer interactions. It's decentralized. Today it's an alternative form of currency that is starting to gain acceptance. It's actually traded publicly. And the question that we're trying to look at in the network of networks is, could we disintermediate banking and supply chain finance? I went to the Wharton School, and when I took my finance exam, the professor wrote on the board that finance is the art of money moving from hand to hand until nothing is left. And supply chains are all about the creation of value. And I think there's a reason why big banks are at the center of every city, because every transaction we have in the supply chain requires today an intermediary that takes 2 to 3% out of every credit card transaction or every wire fee. And so, we've got friction in the transactions. So in the network of networks that Brian and Sweeney have been working with me on, it's an industry group, we're actually starting to test blockchain and Bitcoin for these use cases, which are a subset of the use cases that I talked about earlier. And what we're looking at is network-to-network interoperability, and we're looking at the confluence of technologies, just not blockchain, but also streaming data and Internet of Things that Brian talked about with Apache Spark and 3D printing and the movement of digital images, and how this will actually play perhaps in manufacturing with robotics and wearables and mobility and cognitive computing. To be able to get blockchain to work in the vessel on the writing of the immutable ledger, we believe that we have to rethink things like serialization, and we need to rethink what happens to the data at the nodes. So our first test case is the community directory of supplier data, where we're trying to take the Dun & Bradstreet data and write it across the Limica, E2Open, SAP Ariba, and also looking at GT Nexus. And each of the companies that will be involved in the testing will be writing into the blockchain and will be using cognitive computing for the master data. Now, this is quite different than the 2001 view of B2B, where we thought it would be my ERP to your ERP to their ERP. And, we know that the world of ERP is not up to B2B type of requirements. And so also EDI is a difficult mechanism. It's 40 years old, and it's a lot like the post office. You've got to open a document, and, it's not bidirectional. So as a result, in the supply chain today, we've got buckets of supply chain visibility. There isn't one definition of visibility. And we've got good visibility within a manufacturer, but for across manufacturers, things like lineage, track and trace, genealogy, even second and third tier visibility, we do not have very good information. And in fact, most of the work that is happening today is very passive. It's happening either in portals or phone, email, fax. And so what we're trying to do is really shake up this world and try to make it a different place. Now, on the network of networks, which our next meeting is in July, we have a group of manufacturers, which Brian has been kind enough to offer the Schneider Electric Barcelona test facility, and we are starting to test blockchain as a potential for community directory and lineage. And one of the boundaries of the technology partners that are working with us is it has to be something where they're putting their skin in the game and not charging people big dollars. And what we're trying to do is understand the return on investment. I got a question from a CPG company about what's the return on investment. We just really don't know. We're trying to break down the barriers for people to test and gain an understanding, and then publish that openly and trying to start a new dialogue. And the reason we're doing it is because the industry is stuck today, and we're trying to have people to think about things differently. So, Sweeney, with that, why don't you share a little bit of the work you've done in automotive, and maybe it'll give people some details, and I'll have Brian, and then we'll take the questions from the audience.
Sounds good, Laura. Thank you. So folks, this particular case study is around what is called the system of engagement for automotive, and it's based on blockchain. So if you go to the next slide, Helen. So the idea behind this one is today we talked about many of these requirements or supply chain situations where you want to know the chain of custody, you want to know provenance, you want to know rapid decentralized verification without waiting for a central authority to tell you whether a particular certificate is valid or not. Right? All these case studies exist. Now, how can we leverage blockchain to do things faster, better, cheaper? Right? So that's where we took this automotive use case, which is in the next slide. Right? So the use case here is, so we have suppliers like Mitsubishi, right, that make axles for our tractors, right? And it's actually shipping those products to our plant in Houston, where we assemble it and then ship it out to the dealers and to the end consumer. Now, the problem here is when Mitsubishi finds out that a particular axle has developed some fault, right, they want to quickly notify the particular consumer or the dealer of this issue, right? So with this blockchain, what we've done is we've created a private blockchain which is open to the required or the relevant parties, be it Mitsubishi, be it other suppliers, the consumers, and the dealers. And the moment Mitsubishi publishes a notification to this blockchain, we are able to immediately send that notification to the consumer or whoever owns that particular tractor at that moment, right? So because blockchain is keeping a history of the transfer of ownership, the right party is notified, right? So that reduces the cost to serve, that improves speed in terms of information dispersion. Now going to the next slide, this whole thing is based on few key concepts. So I won't go through into the technical details. We can actually look at this. If somebody has questions, I can address this. But if you just go to the next slide, Helen. So it is based on three few concepts, right? One is the registry of enterprise, right, which is very similar to what Laura is doing on the network of network, which is the supplier registry, right, the community registry. So this is where all the participants will actually register themselves. They'll provide some voluntary information about who they are, things like their DUNS number, GLN code, and things like that. There's a registry of items, right, which becomes very important when you're trying to map items. So, for example, participant A will call an item something, participant B will call an item something else. How do you speed up the mapping of these items? So that's what this particular platform enables. And the last capability that it enables is representing a bill of material. So when you can imagine the number of parts that go into a tractor, right? The idea is not to represent everything in the blockchain, but you want to represent some key parts, right, which are relevant, which are more failure prone, right, which are not easy to replace. So that's what we have done. So I'll be happy to take questions, but there is a lot more details about it in the subsequent slides. But in the interest of time, let me turn it back to Laura.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sweeney. How long did your project take you, and what were your benefits?
So Laura, we started this journey about 9 months ago, right? And it started simply because people were, at least our executive team was asking, well, what can we do with blockchain? Right? Blockchain is kind of disrupting the financial industry. Does it have a potential to disrupt the supply chain and the automotive industry? That's how we got started. Mm-hmm. And what we realized is that, I mean, it's not a new business model. It is just a new way of doing what you've been doing earlier. Yes, it does bring advantages in terms of speed, in terms of decentralization, in terms of robustness, right? But there's still a lot of unknowns in terms of the legal umbrella, right? In terms of right, the security aspect of it. So that's what we are exploring. In terms of the benefits, clearly we see the benefits in terms of speed, track and trace, provenance, and so on, right? But I think it's still going to take some more time before we can really quantify the ROI.
Well, and, one of the issues is that people want a finite return on investment on new technologies and process innovation. And, I think those are the wrong questions. I mean, Brian, in your work on digital innovation with Annette, how has she chartered you? Do you have to have a return on investment to test new technologies, or how are you set up in your lab?
So basically, we're arranged basically to crawl, then walk, and then run. There are no limitations on us experimenting with different technologies, but as we start to walk and run, when we look at the possibility of expanding beyond a proof of concept and into a pilot, say in multiple geographies, that's when we start to have the business discussions as far as, does this make sense for us to actually deploy in a large-scale way? And then we talk a little bit more about the traditional business decisions that go behind it. But so far, the business has been extremely flexible and supportive for us to try things. And I think that we're able to give the business insight as a result of that orientation that in some cases in our traditional operating model, could take many months or potentially even years to develop a thorough understanding of a technology.
And I'm seeing more and more jobs like yours, Brian, which is innovation center to test some of these concepts. Now, we started with the definition of blockchain, and some people joined late. So I define blockchain as an immutable digital registry between or in a party. How do you define blockchain, and talk a little bit about your work with hyperledger?
Okay, so I'm gonna make it really, really simple. So a blockchain is a shared mechanism that is public, that manages trust, that contains a ledger of transactions that are open to anybody that has authorization to inspect the transactions, and no single entity controls the mechanism. So all transactions in the network actually get stored into the blockchain. The easiest way to explain this, and the way that I explain it at home, to the family, is basically think about blockchain as a spreadsheet in the sky, okay? Imagine using a Google Doc spreadsheet. Every person has the latest version of the document, and everybody can inspect it. But in order to change the contents, users need to come to a mutual agreement in this particular model, as opposed to Google Docs. So it's really the spreadsheet in the sky, I think, is the easiest way to explain this. So as far as our implementation, I figure IBM should start chipping in some money for every time I give one of these talks, because I tend to push their flavor a little bit. And I think that there's two reasons why we've standardized on hyperledger for our development activities. And one is, as a company, with our massive transformative purpose is really to help our customers get safe, reliable, efficient, connected, and sustainable energy, and make the most of their energy within their businesses. Hyperledger, as far as an implementation of blockchain is very computationally intensive. Every time somebody adds something to a blockchain, there's math behind that that's done by an entire network of participants in order to validate that content. Hyperledger's implementation of that cryptographic consensus model uses much less energy than some of the other implementations. So Hyperledger is very much aligned with Schneider's vision as far as sustainable and making the right choices from an environmental standpoint. The other reason we use Hyperledger is because it's integrated by IBM into their development environment, which is called Bluemix. So if you haven't seen Bluemix, you need to check this out, because Bluemix is basically a toy box for software developers with all of the best possible components for you to experiment. So it's a rapid application environment that has things like IoT connectors. It has a connector to Watson so that you can experiment with AI and using some of those technologies. And it also has native connectivity back to your mainframe environment. So it's kind of a single stop shop, if you will, for development of these type solutions. So that's the reason why we use Hyperledger. If I transition into the use cases that we've used this for, first and foremost, Laura asked us to try to help with the development of the network of network supplier onboarding concept. So I started working in the lab with the team on kind of fleshing out what this thing would look like. And we found pretty early on, in order for it to really represent reality and to make it real to our business constituents internally, we needed to simulate some of our standard business processes in order to show how things transacted in and out. So the model you see here is pretty complex, but what you need to take away from this is we had the ability to connect legacy systems, store key data in Hyperledger, obscure visibility of confidential information in the Hyperledger, and then also transact with systems below in our technology stack, so that the data that can be pulled from the Hyperledger can be accessed by people that may not necessarily be part of the Schneider family, and we can expose and obscure information as necessary. It's that platform agnostic transposition model that we can use. As we got further into the network of networks, I realized, and the rest of the folks that were working with us said that what you just saw was very Schneider-centric. So we started to strip away down to the bare component level some of the basic capabilities that we wanted to share with the folks that are testing that with us. And this is the simplified model as far as the way that it's been implemented. So the other thing, if you want to jump forward a few slides here, Hannah, to the lessons learned, things that I really want to point out so that folks are aware of where to go with this and where not to go with it. We learned very early on through experimentation that blockchain is not the single cure for all of your problems. This is not going to cure your business's cancer. It's very important that you evaluate the use case and only pick the correct applications. What's an example of something you shouldn't do with blockchain? I'd say the application that I used for storage of IoT or Internet of Things real-time sensor data in blockchain was an absolute nightmare because it was exceeding the capabilities of the technology to add that data to the blockchain in a reasonable amount of time, so it was constantly timing out. So real-time or high-speed data is not a great thing for blockchain. Other things that we found as we went through this is once it's in a blockchain, it's always in a blockchain. That's what we mean when we say immutability. So you need to be very, very sure the quality of the data that you put into the blockchain is at the highest level, especially considering the audience you may be sharing the blockchain with. Think about things that you may or may not want to share with your customers and your suppliers. So system design is of utmost importance. Additionally, security of what you're connecting to the blockchain is super important too. Once it's on the chain, it's there forever. And although blockchain as a security mechanism has yet to be hacked, everything that you would attach to a blockchain, I guarantee, has been cracked in one form or another. So your standard info security capabilities need to be at the highest level before you start to take your way down this journey. And then last but not least, this is not a dumping ground. This is not your new Dropbox alternative. References to materials is a great way to actually share content, but storing big content, engineering specifications, photographs, videos, things like that, it's best to index and manage the content off the blockchain and just refer to it so that people know where to go, and they use that as the guide for them to get the content that they're looking for.
Brian, we got a question from Josh. He's saying, should we, in our testing, only look at Bitcoin, or are we going to look at other currencies like Lifecoin or Peercoin? And we're not that far along in our discussions. So if anybody has any thoughts there about how we're going to actually do the supply chain finance pilots, we would love to hear from you and have you join in. Do you have any thoughts there, Brian or Sweeney, about the variants of Bitcoin for testing?
I'll let Sweeney jump in that one first.
Laura, actually, no, right? All of these are valid or feasible alternatives. So I think we'll probably have to do some more research to see which one to pick for a pilot.
Right. Brian, your thoughts there? Any thoughts there?
From a finance standpoint, Laura, I think that if I was just starting out and I was looking to do something on the financial sector, it's more important as a fledgling company that doesn't really understand the technology to pick your partner. So, I think that Sweeney's organization does a great job of connecting you to the right parties. But also, for example, and again, I need $1 every time I mention these guys, but Deloitte is working on a bank called Project Consensus, which is specifically financial-oriented blockchain implementations. R3 is connected to distributed ledgers across the world in many, many different banks. Microsoft, specifically the Azure Development Lab, has their own implementation on the financial side. There are many different ways to go. I would say if you don't understand the technology, you need to start to research the partners in the infrastructure, pick the right partners, and learn together as you make your way through development of your first few tests.
Great. Now, Sharish asked the question about lineage and will it change current systems and how we think about lineage, and that's actually one of the things that we want to define. Sweeney, what are your thoughts there about how the writing of lineage or serialization data in legacy systems will need to change for blockchain? Any thoughts there?
Yes, so there's two aspects to lineage, right? With lineage, especially from an internal perspective, right? So yes, you can do the classic way of serialization to store that data in your ERP system. But lineage with blockchain has a totally different concept. Now you're talking about sharing the same ID or information with other partners, right? So the concept of serialization would still apply to blockchain, but now the security aspect, giving restricted access and time-bound access, some of those factors need to be considered. The third aspect is, which we have barely touched about, is smart contracts, right? How do you bring smart contracts into the picture where, depending on certain rules, right, the lineage becomes visible to certain parties within this trading network.
Right. Now, there's a question about the consortia, and this is the network of networks work we're doing, and it's open to anybody that wants to join. The boundaries are that people can only send up to 2 people, and what we're doing is we're designing the test, and companies are volunteering to test. And the reason why we're doing this is that not all companies have a Brian and a test lab and the ability to be able to test things and to ideate around digital transformation around some of these technologies. My goal is to try to open up the dialogue of B2B in a greater way because we're stuck. And our goal on the supply chain finance is to be able to test the disintermediation of credit cards or P cards, to be able to do transactions without an intermediary involved. So, Brian, how mature do you think blockchain is? If you had to, characterize this for your mother, is it a cake that's just still baking, or is it ready for prime time?
So I think the cake is ready to eat, but I think that there are too many different types of cake necessarily from an industry standpoint to standardize on one kind of cake, to kind of stay with your analogy. I think that we're obviously much further ahead than we were in 2009. There have been a lot of larger institutions that started to play with this that were backing one version or another that are no longer with us. So I think you're getting the Darwin effect, which is really starting to thin the herd a little bit, as it were, in order to provide better offerings for the industry in order to kind of pick their flavors. It's not something that I would hesitate as a business to get involved in a mainstream way at this point, to be honest with you. And the barriers in order to get involved in this are very, very low. I'd say the majority of the businesses that are on the phone with us today have software developers in one shape or form as part of their organizations. And, for example, Hyperledger is something that's actually backed by the Linux Foundation. There are implementations of the solution that you can play with for free. Or you can work with IBM, and they have the platform as a service offering that we talked about before, Bluemix. It's very, very low technological threshold. You can go buy this stuff and start to play with it in your business today, and I strongly recommend that you do that.
Yeah, but Brian, don't you think the bigger issue is the paradigm and the supply chain model? I mean, people don't know what blockchain is, and I find that most of the people who do EDI are in an e-commerce world that then when they talk to business people, there's a whole gulf of communication issues. Don't you think that's our bigger issue here?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the maturity level as far as the general knowledge base regarding the applicability of the technology still has a couple years before it's really kind of mainstream. But, in my opinion, this is the same sort of thing that you saw with the World Wide Web coming out of the 90s into the 2000s. This will be mainstream technology that everybody will be looking to in order to be part of their business on an ongoing basis. We're just very early on in that journey, Laura, and we still have a long way to go.
Sweeney, how about your thoughts? How mature is it? How far along is the cake, and how do you change the paradigm?
Yeah. So, Laura, when you look at blockchain itself, right, especially in the financial world, it is reasonably mature thanks to Bitcoin and other currencies, right? And in fact, if you look at e-commerce sites like Overstock.com, they actually accept Bitcoin payments, right? There is an online bank now, WB21, which accepts Bitcoins. So, but it went through its phase, right? That's maturity curve. And the same thing is now starting to happen in supply chain, where people are now realizing that there is an alternative to some of the highly centralized or a single-party controlled processes, where blockchain can actually create an alternative, lower cost, cheaper, robust approach. Right, so I think it will take another couple of years before it starts to become mainstream. But the key is it's not about the blockchain is just the enabler, right? Once people realize that these are the use cases that can be enabled by blockchain, then it will start to gather some momentum. But at the same time, what we also need to keep in mind is the incumbents are not going to sit still, right? If blockchain is threatening them in terms of lower cost, decentralization, is there something they can do on their side to actually lower the cost to serve? And then that creates a kind of pushback on blockchain. So I'm waiting to see how this plays out, right, between the incumbents and blockchain.
Yeah, I think we all are. Well, in my view, Brian and Sweeney, the way people get started is they find out what their developers are working with or their infrastructure providers are, and they start to design with the goal in mind. I know you're working on, warranty and parts and, your use case, Sweeney, and Brian, you're working on lineage. So I think getting started with the goal in mind, but I think also realizing that we're still very early in the journey. What recommendation would you have for people, Sweeney?
So, Laura, first of all, I think the Network of Networks, your forum, has done a fantastic job actually focusing on the use cases for supply chain. I think it'll be helpful if those who want information can absolutely reach out to this forum, right, to see how companies like Corning and Dow and others are looking at this, right? That is one. And there's a ton of information out there from the platform as a service providers like Microsoft and IBM that Brian talked about. That will absolutely help in understanding how you can play in this sandbox, right, and how you can do some rapid prototyping. So beyond that, I think it is about filtering out the deluge of information thanks to Bitcoin and the currency sector, the financial sector. How do you filter that out? So that's where working with the right partner, asking the right questions would help a lot.
And Brian, one of the things that I've put on the screen is the network of networks going to be actually showcased at the Imagine conference that we're going to be doing in September 2017, where we're going to be talking about this along with, other digital technologies and really mapping outside-in processes in the digital supply chain. So this is a possibility for people to come and to imagine the possibilities and work with others. How else can people get started, or what are your thoughts? I know, Brian, you came to this conference last year. What would be your recommendation? You still there, Brian?
Can you hear me, Laura?
I can now, yep.
Okay, sorry about that. At least from my perspective, I think joining a group like the Network of Networks Consortium is a great thing to do because people are all at different levels of their journey and learning and trying to experiment with this technology in that group. So you get experience from different industries, different use cases, and you get the perspectives of multiple different providers. And I think it's a great way to kind of get the Reader's Digest view, if you will, as far as how to get into this thing. As a geek, my perspective is there's no better way to learn about a technology than to play with it. I think that there's a lot of energy specifically around this topic in the business world right now, and I know that at least when I engage with our IT folks within our business, they're super excited about the possibility of working with the technology and potentially helping to develop some test cases. So I would say use the lift of the popularity of the technology as a way to start to play with it. And then last but not least, I can post on my LinkedIn some of the different books that I would recommend. There is a ton of material out there. It's easy to dip your toes in the pool, get familiar with the language, and then start to join some of these groups, and then basically just start to ramp up through involvement with what you do. And like Sweeney said, also picking your partners. There are a lot of businesses out there that have a very long track record, longer than I do, of using the technology and testing with it. Pick a great partner and pick a use case and scope it appropriately to what your risk tolerance is for spending on the new technologies, and go do some stuff.
Absolutely. So we have a couple of questions. Doug asks, what role do we think the U.S. government will play as a blocker and enabler of blockchain? And, who knows? I know the U.S. government is testing healthcare records in the VA. Any thoughts on that question, Sweeney or Brian?
If you take the financial markets as an example, right? I mean, the U.S. government has tried to look into regulating it, right? But I don't think it's moving anywhere, or people are still exploring how to regulate Bitcoin. I'm sure the same philosophy, right, and results will probably follow into the supply chain space too, and the broader blockchain network.
Yep. Gaurav asked the question, if value chains build their own blockchains, well, at some point will we have conflict with other blockchains where the architecture will have a mismatch? I don't see that happening, Brian. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the technology and the details about how we won't have that problem.
Well, if you think about this from the perspective of the spreadsheet and the sky paradigm, you can copy and paste from one to another as long as you have the appropriate permissions and you have the right connectors to get you between the two systems. So I think that this, as we start to see the platforms winnow down, there are going to be less standard platforms that businesses are going to be using. If we standardize on a technology stack, it'll be easy for us to jump from stack to stack. And given the fact that the basic underpinnings of the technology are underwritten with some standard ideas around consensus modeling and the overall way that these things transact, which was in the 2008 document by Satoshi Nakamoto, as long as people follow the basic premise of the technology, I think integration will continue to be something that's very feasible no matter what it is that they're actually using.
Right. I also have a question from Rajad who says, what role can academia play in blockchain use case development? You know, I think, Rajad, one of the challenges of academia is that we're teaching supply chain the old-fashioned way, right? I think academia has got to rise above the basic APIC score kind of thinking to think about business networks and to think about supply chain more holistically. And I think giving students some of the materials that Brian is advocating and perhaps even working with IBM on hyperledger test cases would be excellent for students to work on. I'd love to see a blockchain lab just like we have robotics labs to be able to test some of these concepts. Those are my thoughts. Sweeney or Brian, any thoughts there about the role of academia?
So from an academia perspective, a lot of the first thing is that the actual use cases, right? So most of the industry, be it manufacturing, retail, right, logistics, that's where we hit reality first, right? And that's where we are trying to use enablers like blockchain to actually speed up or reduce the cost. Now, from an academia perspective, yes, I mean, is there ways to make this interaction or integration between blockchains much more robust, right? How do we enhance security? I mean, that's where there'll be a lot of value that academia can provide to this particular forum, right, or to this initiative.
Right. Right, and I think, you know, there's nothing in the literature right now about blockchain, so I think also contributing to the literature in a meaningful way through academia around the use cases would be helpful. Now, Devin asked a question about the spreadsheet in the sky image, which I think is really helpful, Brian. His question is, how do you enforce process controls and uniformity of data across the parties and the processes? Can you give some insights about that, Brian?
Yeah, so I mean, at the highest and most basic level, basically the way that you architect one of these solutions, you can do the same things that you would if we were to stay with the spreadsheet in the sky vision. Just like you can limit certain types of data in certain fields in your Excel spreadsheet or your Google spreadsheet, you can do the same things with applications that you develop under these platforms. So a lot of the basic system and application design concepts, you know, whether it's systems development lifecycle or some of the RAD and other things that are really prevalent within software development, the same types of ideas can be used in order to manage transactions as well as data types and make sure that the data that goes in meets the specifications of the intention for a given block. Okay.
Well, we're going to wrap it up now. I'm hoping to see everyone at the Global Summit If you can't make the Global Summit in person, we will be live casting it. It's our goal to have people all around the world watching the case studies on cognitive computing, software robotics, wearables, the blockchain work, the network of networks work. We believe it's a confluence of technologies that will help us to unstick the supply chain. And we have to think about outside-in processes and how we really redefine what we've been doing. Helen, I'll turn it back over to you, and I just want to remind people that we do share all of the slides and we do share these webinar recordings for post-replay, and if anybody has any questions or they want to join the Network of Networks work, it's all open. It's our goal to try to help people to seize the possibilities and imagine the future. Brian and Sweeney, thank you very much. Helen, back to you.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you to everyone for tuning in and to our panelists today. A few things before we end. As mentioned, we will send out the slides and recording links to everyone who is in attendance today, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from us. We also encourage you to engage with us on social media by following us on Twitter and Facebook and joining our LinkedIn company page and following us on SlideShare. You can find all the information for these accounts in the slide deck. Thank you.